good afternoon. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being here on this beautiful Sunday afternoon. And thanks, as usual, to Malaprops for hosting us. I'm Jennifer McGahab. I had to write that down because I always forget to say that. So I'm the coordinator for the Great Smokies Writing Program, and we're delighted that you're here. Before we begin, I wanted to let you know about our summer workshops that are going to begin the week of June the 5th. We're offering 6 5-week classes, some online and some in person, so you can take your pick, including 2 fiction workshops, a flash memoir workshop, 2 poetry workshops, and a multi-genre workshop on writing about ghosts. That one's going to be fun. For more information, you can come and talk with me after the reading, or you can go to our website, greatsmokies.unca.edu. And now for the main act. We are here today to celebrate the release of the Great Smokies Review, the online literary journal that highlights the work of Great Smokies students and faculty, past and present. The review began in 2009 under the guidance of former Great Smokies Executive Director Tommy Hayes as a way of building our writing community, creating a forum for discussion and learning, and highlighting excellent writing. Now 14 years old and counting, the Great Smokies Review is published twice a year and features poetry, fiction, nonfiction, interviews, faculty writings, and local writerly news. Elizabeth Lutkins, who taught in the Great Smokies for 18 years, serves as editor-in-chief, and we are grateful for her leadership, as well as for all the editors and writers who contributed their time and talents to creating this beautiful issue of the review. I'm now going to turn things over to Elizabeth as she introduces our readers for today.
Thank you, Jennifer. It's so good to be back here at Malaprops, this time to celebrate our 28th issue. We only do 2 a year, so that's a big time span to cover. And thanks all of you for being here to do this with us. It really, it's just wonderful to have this audience. With me are 2 members of the Great Smokies Review team, Julie Abbott. You can do it. Our submissions editor. She does all that incredible final copywriting to make all the writers look as if they know everything about everything. And mostly they do. Yeah. And Patrick Pickering, our UNC Asheville intern for 2023. Our features editor, Janet Moore, is joining us on Zoom, and we welcome everyone else who's viewing us that way today. Reading are some of the writers whose work appears in our spring issue. They are Zoe Newton, a senior at UNC Asheville, who is pursuing a career in middle and secondary school teaching. In addition to writing, I didn't mean to just tack that on. As Black Student Association Vice President, she has led programming centered on cultural exploration, sexual health, and Black history. Zoe was our UNCA intern for spring and fall 2022. She makes a return appearance today to read from her essay, Selective Memory. Karen Luke Jackson, author of Grit and The View Ever Changing, draws upon contemplative practices, nature, clowning, and oral history for inspiration. Her work has appeared in numerous journals, including one in Broad River Review, for which she won the 2012 Ron Brash Poetry Award. More recently, she's been published in Atlantic Review, Ruminate, Friends Journal, and Channel Magazine, to name a few. She has an incredible resume. In addition to writing poetry, Karen is an educator and retreat leader with the Center for Courage and Renewal. Billie Harper Bowie is a longtime participant in the Great Smokies Writing Program. She's published poetry and short stories in journals including Calyx, the Great Smokies Review, and Thomas Wolfe Review. She was the 2007 recipient of the Thomas Wolfe Fiction Prize for her short story, Shining Rock Wilderness. Her contribution to this issue is part of an ongoing short story collection based on a fictional mountainside neighborhood in Asheville. The Reverend Dr. Judith A. Davis, a retired Episcopal priest and college professor, is now an adjunct faculty member in religion at Brevard College. Her art and poetry are published in Cackalack 2022, North Carolina Bard's Poetry Anthology 2022, and the forthcoming spring 2023 issue of Chiaroscuro, a literary and arts journal of Brevard College. Zoe Rhine is a retired Buncombe County Special Collections librarian, where she started an Asheville history blog in 2013, Heard Tell. She subsequently compiled a book from these posts, Hidden History of Asheville, published by Arcadia's History Press in 2019. She received her Master of Fine Arts from Goddard College and has taught creative writing at UNC Asheville. She is currently writing creative nonfiction pieces, Mother Stories, as she continues to research and write about Asheville's historic Black community. Amanda Burns lives in Fairview on a small farm where she and her husband raise pigs, goats, and a big garden. She has a degree from Warren Wilson College and has been writing since she could hold a pencil. Amy Jane Lynch is at work on a novel, historical fiction, one chapter of which was published as the short story Fault Lines in Sundial magazine. Her nonfiction essay for this issue is based on her memories of growing up in the Appalachians, and the land where she lives is the traditional home of the Cherokee. We'll begin with Zoe Newton.
Apparently I'm the tallest one here, so we're gonna have to make sure. I've seen my father pull down a car window with his hands. When times are tough, he gets restless. In this case, my dad paced, raking his hands through shoulder-length black dreadlocks while trying to stomp a mud hole in the concrete. Once I realized the keys were stuck in the car, I was tempted to ask what our next move would be. Before I could ask, I saw my dad place his hands flat upon the driver's side window. Pressing down upon the glass, he used all of his weight to push. I snapped into consciousness at 4 years old, wondering what life would bring me. I woke up in my Fisher-Price race car bed, my cousin's beds lying empty around me, surrounded by 4 pastel yellow walls that run up to the sky, a fat boxy TV laid up in the corner, and windows that shed light upon everything. In that space, with the freedom of a blank slate, I felt unshakable excitement. What does the world have in store for me today? I believed that somewhere out there I was already that perfect person I dreamt of. Living was simply the means to my glorious end that made all the nonsense worth it. A couple of days into the first week of pre-K, I saw a new girl sitting alone in the corner of the room. In a room full of toddlers, toys, and all the picture books you could flip through, Q sat at a table by herself in her dark blue jean jacket. Her cool energy drew me in. I tapped Q on the shoulder, eager to welcome her into the classroom, only to black out in seconds. As her grip tightened around my neck, I faded, losing feeling in my fingers, feeling my body go limp. I distinctly remember suffocating, being uncomfortable, but not painful. As much as I wanted to fight back and protect myself, I couldn't. My fear bubbled up and I hunkered down in the hopes that it would pass. As the weeks went on, I accepted Q's non-apology and my lack of closure. At any moment, anything could happen, and that was just something I had to get used to. Outside of watching football, baseball, or going out with family, my dad's favorite activity is working out. Whenever he's scared, frustrated, or lost with no idea where to turn next, he goes to the gym. That place is his church. He always used to ask if I wanted to go with him, and I never said yes, because my father could be out there for hours. He'd justify this by saying he likes to take his time. There's no need to hurt himself by rushing. He's the guy in the gym that people can't help but stare at. He's practically a gym god. He consistently shows up after the midday rush. He despises being in the room with New Year resoluters, but he doesn't want them to stay long. Occasionally, people work up the courage to ask him for advice while he's in the middle of a set with his headphones in. He hates when people try to train with him because they tap out early and slow down his routine. He's not there to socialize and only flexes in the mirror to ensure he's maintaining. He cleans up his area, particularly peeved by the other gym rats who make a show out of using the heaviest weights and making someone else put them away. My dad looks like a functioning bodybuilder, ripped but not scrawny. As far as he's concerned, if you take care of your body, it means you can do whatever you want, including eating whatever you want as long as you can burn it off. He stands by his hundreds, breathing by his push-ups and sit-ups to get to the main event, weightlifting. He has those Hulk Hogan biceps, and in comparison, my 4-year-old legs weren't even half the size. My dad is solid. I used to poke his muscles looking for a soft spot, a weakness before he'd flex, becoming invulnerable once again, maintaining this facade of a man of steel. My father didn't try to convince me that fear wasn't real. If I was afraid of something, he'd simply say, do it scared. He loves to impersonate my old Brazilian Taekwondo teacher, enunciating with flair, confidence. Worried about failure? Have some confidence. Scared of embarrassing yourself? Confidence. Nervous about life? Confidence, Zoe. In training, this meant a deeper focus, dig a little bit deeper, remember what I've practiced and believe in myself. From my father, this felt more like hurry up. Glimpses of peace set my mind ablaze. I grew up in New Jersey, about an hour away from New York. Nonetheless, I felt constantly like I was in the city. I can still feel the glare of the Holland Tunnel's orange lights, momentary adventures into somewhere else. I used to follow my dad around New York, keeping my eyes and ears open to catch whatever life lessons flew by. We walked around the sweltering summer heat looking for ices, not just Rita's or X-brand nonsense, but that authentic Italian shaved ice from an authentic Italian man with a mustache lugging a cart through the streets. We walked up to this small mustachioed man pushing his cart around the park. My dad bought coconut for himself and cherry for me. I can still smell the sticky syrup dripping down my hands as I clutched the frozen treat. One particular day, we were going to my uncle's house, which meant having access to one of the greatest views on the planet. If I was lucky, which I always was. My uncle would take me to the roof of his apartment and give me binoculars to see the whole city. I could stare at that strawberry lemonade horizon over the skyline forever.
Thank you. I want to start off by thanking the Great Smokies team, Jennifer and Elizabeth, and also Malaprops for this space to read and celebrate. Any success I've had, I told Elizabeth when I came in the door, is because I started taking classes in Great Smokies in 2008. And it has been the place in which I have developed my poems and my creative nonfiction stories. So thank you very much. I'm going to start with two poems that were both written in Tina Barr's class, and the first one that I'll read was published in the Great Smokies Review, and I consider them sort of companion poems because I had some health challenges last year and underwent some surgery last spring, and when I entered Tina's class in the fall, she was talking about writing poems of necessity, poems that had to be written. And I realized I had to write about that experience. So the first poem is Open Heart. A ball of honeyed light the size of a lemon dashes from heart to knee, wrist behind a shoulder blade, flees to a hip when I'm shimmied from bed to gurney and wheeled into surgery. Soon I am asleep, or so it seems. But she is not. Now she quivers outside my heart, terrified by the beeping pumps hosing fluid into limbs, the mass smothering my mouth, compelling body to breathe. She dims, divides like mercury, sends small drops of herself, now thunderstorm gray, toward a finger, a toe, as far as possible from the chest. She does not know why she agreed to accompany me into flesh and bone, does not want to stay. But if she vanishes, I will die. That she knows. So like a child, she hides and peers through keyholes. The next poem is entitled Plumbed. It's a little continuation of this journey. Imagine me twirling, arms outstretched, palms raised toward heaven, a girl dizzy in her yard on Alder Street, collapsing onto a bed of St. Augustine grass. She knows nothing of whirling dervishes, nothing of marriage or divorce, or the surgery when her sternum will be sawed open. It's nothing more than a plumber changing a gasket, a friend assures before I enter the OR. Wake 2 days later, so ballooned with fluid that eyelids refuse to open. I bought a burial plot and a white cotton shroud. Wouldn't you too have prepared? Last night, body tangled in wires and sheets, my childhood home burned. The pine floors my father sawmilled, the kitchen where my mother canned. Who fiddled my heart while my chest lay splayed? Who spun me back to that young girl's world? So, as I was healing from the open heart surgery, I had a poet friend, Kathleen Calby, who kept saying, you've got to start writing again, because for the year or two when I was sick and before the surgery, I had sort of quit writing. And she kept encouraging me, and I felt overwhelmed by the challenge. I thought, how will I ever get started again? And then I thought about what a beautiful area we live in. I live in a cottage on a goat pasture in Flat Rock, North Carolina, about a mile from the Carl Sandburg house. And I thought I had written a couple of little poems about living in this cottage. And I thought maybe I can write poems about that, the goats, the peacock, the trail up Big Glassy. And I started writing poems in Tina's class and some other classes. And actually it turned into a collection, which is going to be published as a chapbook this summer. And so I thought I would read you the title poem from that book to sort of let you know that the healing that nature provided for me was just incredible, as was the writing. So the title poem from that book is If You Choose to Come. If you choose to come, I'll give you a meadow where daffodils beckon year round and lakes that shimmer multiple suns. A high meadow where bluebirds flirt and swallowtails loll. A pasture of turf not bound by time, where honeysuckle sugars air and raindrops trill. If you choose to come, you'll find a well-worn path that rambles past blackberries ever ripe for plucking. From there, you can climb to where red spruce and Fraser fir thrive, then hike down the other side toward a steepled church, doors swung wide, a lover inside. And so I'm going to close with a poem, another poem that was written out of necessity. And it takes me back to my childhood, and it was written in Eric Nelson's class this past spring. I grew up in South Georgia, where my father sawmilled and my mother canned, about an hour's drive from the Okefenokee Swamp. And during this past year, I became aware that the swamp is endangered again from a mining operation. And there was a big campaign mounted to try to get the state of Georgia to decline the permits. So there was a writing campaign. And I wrote a letter along with 100,000 other people and sent it to the state of Georgia, but it didn't feel like enough to write that letter. So I was in Eric's class, and this poured out, and with the help of fellow students who helped me hone it, I have this poem, and I think it's going to be published in Georgia in the next couple of weeks. So the title of this poem about the Okefenokee Swamp is Trembling Earth. Summers, driving to the beach in our blue Oldsmobile, my father would reach through his roll-down window as we passed the Okefenokee's Waycross entrance and point. That's where Pogo lives. He never stopped. And if we knew the Blackwater Swamp that bubbled close to our home was the largest in North America, or that it harbored Muskogee burial grounds, I forgot. Until at a family reunion, children and grandchildren in tow, we booked a sunset cruise. My mother declined to go. It's a sight to behold, she granted, but some people never come back. The boat glides in inky waters through meadows of pitcher plants and water lilies. An alligator sprawls on a tussock, its eyes shuttered. Our guide idles the craft near a rookery where sandhill cranes and ibises, herons and egrets racket the sky. The birds roost in towering cypresses, their white wings, rosy breast, and blue feathers lit like ornaments. We bundle in puffer jackets, watch a lazy black current swallow the orange glow. A quarter moon rises, our signal to leave. Years later, a prairie burns. Ash coats cotton fields that neighbor my parents' home. But a fire keeps a swamp, we're told. Unlike the Twin Pines mine that will claw away soil and pirate sand from Okefenokee's ancient dam, the treasure, titanium oxide for smoke grenades and solar panels, an additive that makes white paint whiter, makes paper, toothpaste, and marshmallows brighter. The company promises limited damage, good paying jobs, whitewashes the loss, wetlands, tupelos, bobcats, and bitterns. In such a wake, bones rattle and mud quakes. Thank you.
I'm Billy Bowie, and I started during COVID writing about a street in Asheville, and I ended up writing about a 100-year span. And this particular reading is going to be from a story that was in the years after World War II, 1949. You a little bit closer? Yes. Is that better? Yes. Okay. Refugees. Peter trudged up Lexington Avenue on a windy November day in 1949. The Asheville street was busy, shoppers and businessmen leaning into the chill as they pulled fur and wool coats tighter around their necks. Some paused and greeted Peter, some even reached to shake his hand, but he drew tight inside himself, moving through town the way he'd learned to do when he was young, imagining himself frozen in ice, unable to hear or see the disappointment, the embarrassment of what he was. He entered Bon Marché at 12:15, as Maud had instructed, and headed for the hat department. He relaxed a bit inside, into the old world elegance of the department store, named after the famous store in Paris, when Asheville considered itself the Paris of the South. He couldn't help running his fingers through cashmere and silk scarves lining the front counters, then the buttery softness, the muted shades of leather gloves beside them, all ready for the Christmas rush that would descend the first week in December, when he'd be back in the safety of New York. When he saw Esty, he knew right away she was the girl Mott described, a new girl from down east instead of the mountains, an unusual sight in Asheville. Her fine, firm face, chestnut hair, shapely figure, an immaculate maroon wool dress with beautifully covered black buttons at the neck, all fit Mott's description. But this wasn't the eager girl he'd come to expect from Mott's many suggestions. She was older, not as old as Peter's 45 years, but at least early 30s. The look on her face as she watched a stout woman pass with her arms draped casually over two children was murderous. Peter considered leaving. He hated unpleasant encounters, but Mott had insisted, with a peculiar intensity she rarely showed, on this time, this girl. He approached her, lapsing briefly into the stutter of his childhood. Mott, my mother, said to ask only you for help. Her face transformed so abruptly, he doubted the rage he'd seen before. Mott sent you? Of course I can help, Esty said, after he explained his mission. Such refinement. But she's a mind of her own, I'm sure you know. She mentions you often, her successful son in New York. Esty tilted her head, regarding him with unsettling curiosity. She glanced at his cashmere coat, his silk scarf and English fedora. You'll have opinions about this birthday gift, she said. Let me pull a few things for you. She strode across the women's section as if she owned the store. Here we are. Esty laid 3 suits on a counter and disappeared again, returning a moment later with scarves and matching pumps. The rich colors, the fabrics were exactly what Mott would like, and more expensive than she'd pay. Peter didn't know why his father had been so insistent on getting an extravagant birthday present for Mott this year, but he so seldom acknowledged that Peter, his only child, could do a job better than he could. Peter was anxious to prove him right. He'd thought about telling Mott he wanted to buy something for a girl in New York to keep the birthday present a surprise, but Mott saved him that humiliation by anticipating their plans and telling him exactly what he needed to do, just like she'd always done. Petey, you're back in town to buy a suit? Buck O'Connell leaned across the counter with his familiar smirk, unchanged since childhood. Does look a tad small for you. Peter froze, not wanting to risk another stutter. Buck clapped him on the back, hard enough to sting. Just kidding. Hey there, Esty. Just saw you through the front window. I didn't know you worked sales too. He warmed his smile for her. Buck started to say more, but Esty spoke over him, stepping forward with surprising aggression, bordering on rudeness. Excuse us. My customers and I have some decisions to make. He doesn't have much time. Buck stepped back, holding his hands up in mock surrender. Menswear is all the way back on the left, she added. Someone there will help you. She frowned, tapping the counter until he walked away. Peter took a breath, fighting to find himself again. He was a sad case, letting a childhood bully unnerve him. He gazed at the 3 outfits. Thank you. He couldn't keep the formality from his voice, but he managed a tight smile. He wanted her to know that he was grateful, that her brashness didn't offend him. These are lovely, just right for her. I wish I could buy them all, but I'll take this one with the royal blue pumps. That's the best choice, she said, looking at him with new appreciation. You have an eye, don't you? She gift wrapped the suit herself, tying a gorgeous crimson bow on top. Peter grew agitated when Buck passed by again. Mott said he cheated on his wife so many times, no one bothered counting anymore. Esty turned her back on Buck when he approached. She gripped Peter's arm, pretending to show him watches in the case below. He flinched, like he always did when women touched him, nervous about her intent. Listen, she lowered her voice. You and I could help each other a lot in this world. He leaned away from her, startled and alarmed by her intensity. but she didn't let go of his sleeve. My husband is dead. I'll never marry again, but I could use a friend like you, an escort of sorts to keep the buckos away. I think you could use a friend like me too. We'd be a couple, but not the couple people think we are. If she'd crashed into a frozen pond and yanked him out, he wouldn't have been more shocked. What did you say? He gripped the counter, slightly dizzy.
I'm Judith Davis. I wrote the first poem, which is in the review in Bruce Spang's class, and the other two in Tina Barr's class. I grew up in Eastern North Carolina, which might be reflected a while in listening to these, a long time ago. Oh, is it not high enough? Okay, thank you. The one published in the review is, okay, is that good? That's not the name of it. Is that good? Yeah. Stopping by a farm stand on a summer afternoon. Driving back to Brevard on a late August day, I saw a farm stand with signs for fresh peaches and quickly slowed down, hoping to buy some to take home. As I climbed the stairs of the open air market, to my surprise, the sign "Figs" drew my attention away from peaches, and my mind journeyed back to Granny's and Daddy's fig bushes. Granny didn't want us grandchildren to pick figs, and her large 6-foot imposing frame and stern face, like the fig police, kept us from fresh figs we loved. Mama and Daddy had a beautiful fig bush as well, and Daddy made the best fig preserves in the whole world. And I still remember the sweet smell as he cooked figs and sugar over a propane stove in the carport after he picked the ruddy, almost purple fruit, delicate, tender, and slightly fuzzy to the touch. When I was home, I helped him pick figs and popped a few in my welcoming mouth as I went picking and savoring each sweet bite, while gathering enough figs for a few jars of preserves, knowing I would get a jar to take home. Daddy still made fig preserves when he was 90, and he would hold the ladder for me to climb up the 10-foot bush to pick figs at the top, sometimes holding my breath at the height. As I dropped each purple treasure into the waiting pail Daddy held as he steadied the ladder and welcomed that manna from heaven. Daddy's keen eyes would spot a ripe fig hiding behind a leaf, always being the supervisor of the fig picking. And I loved being with Daddy, picking figs and sharing precious time together. When Daddy moved into assisted living, I grieved for that fig bush, then at least 10 feet high, and remember Daddy holding the ladder for me to pick figs from the top. My cousin Kathy bought Daddy's house and cherished the fig tree, offering me figs in late summer when I came to town. As I held the figs placed in my hand, they were like sweet communion to me. Upon opening the last jar of preserves Daddy made, I wept over that jar as if it were the hidden treasure in the field of life and wanted to preserve that sticky, sweet taste forever. Whenever I find southern figs at the farm stands in late summer, they whisper sweet words of love and family, reminding me of Daddy's amazing preserves as they invite me to take them home. The next poem I wrote in Tina Barr's class, I think. The title is Joy, My Muse, My All. On a cold December morning, as I got up and raised the shade, Mama said Joy had gone to be with Jesus. Her beautiful light turned off. I didn't know death. I didn't know life without my twin, her life cut off and gone forever, a piece of my own soul lost in 6th grade. I had no idea at the hospital 3 days before when I saw her, I would never see Joy again, except in the open casket at the wake. A long ago memory as vivid as the day we gathered on the road to the lake for the burial at Daddy's old churchyard, where our sister Betty's grave lay beside hers. My family stood on the little hill at the old Flat Rock churchyard. Everyone pulled their coat collars up to brave the cold, snowy, windy day when they laid my twin sister to rest, as they say. And none but Mama and Daddy and I knew the incredible pain so hard. Roses and other flowers encased in ice made beauty all around. I focused on the colors of those ice-wrapped roses and also thought of home, near the lake where we loved in summer, to the time the butterflies would roam. I had never been to a graveside to see men place a casket in the cold ground. Sometimes we went to the churchyard in good weather and tried to have hope. I loved the lamb on the grave of Betty, our older sister, now with the angels. I loved the angel on Joy's grave the most, and that Joy and Betty were now angels. In summer, we saw the butterflies there and the birds singing to give us hope. I thought about what was lost besides my dear Joy, her poetry, music, art, drama, and bright flame that could have enriched so many. The larger world that might have known her gifts in art and music aplenty. I tried to play piano and paint, but I could not come close to the talent of Joy. Now in my old age, the irony returns. I publish poems and paintings, share my religious icons, and sing. My son does musical theater, draws, plays drums, and sings. Joy's spirit is our muse for the creative flame that now within us burns. This third one is about birds. I mostly write poems about birds, and Karen, I loved yours. This is a tribute to Frost. I know a place where beech trees grow in the winter woods deep with snow, a place where green lichen clings to trees while I watch a flock of chickadees. The woods are quiet, clear, and cool, where a painted turtle pops up from the pool, and in the stillness of air and trees, I hear the whispered flutter of chickadees. I love the quiet of the forest path. I hear the voice of God at last, a voice that comes in quiet calm and warms my heart with loving balm. I would stay in this deep and quiet place if only life would slow down a pace, and I could build a treehouse here and love God's creatures who are near. I must go home this New Year's Eve as I work and care and take my leave of this sanctuary of time and place with its lovely birds who sing with grace. Next year will come in a few short hours, and I will explore birds and trees and bowers. I will seek quiet and joy and peace, and not forget this day of ease. Thank you.
My mother lived with us for the last 2 years of her life, 65, 67, her age. And while she was living with us, I wrote mother stories the whole time. And this is a mother story. The prankster's laughter stone skips across the lake. However old you are, when you can walk down a long yard without falling down, but your legs are still chubby, is how old I was. My father was standing at the end of our dock, looking out over the water. Even at an early age, I had never known my dad to be pensive, but he had on his black ribbed polo shirt and black cotton pants. When I reached him at the end of the dock and held up my hand, he turned to me. It was not my dad, nor any man I had ever seen. I turned and ran screaming back up to the house where my mother stood, having watched it all. She was bent over laughing so hard she couldn't stand up straight. She couldn't pick me up and hold me. When my brother and I were still very young, our parents took us to a drive-in movie theater to see the 1960s Hitchcock movie, Psycho. At the most horrifying moment in the film, when the camera turns to a woman's corpse in a rocking chair, Mother turned to my brother and me in the back seat, and with both hands outstretched, she screamed. My brother, 5 years older, said it took him months to be able to sleep without a light on. When I was 9 or so, I came across a neat trick. You get an egg out of the refrigerator and set it on a table beside you. Then you ask someone to sit down on a chair facing away from you. You put a cup can on top of their head, smack it with your other hand, and then draw your fingers slowly down over their head. I tried this on my friend Wayne. I can barely remember what he looked like, a bit chubby. He played Tom Sawyer in our 6th grade play. My mother, watching it all, said, "Let me try." She walked around behind Wayne, picked up the real egg, cracked it on top of his head, and laughed until she almost couldn't breathe. After I remembered this story, I wondered if Wayne ever came back to our house. Mother was, I guess, born a prankster. She told me once about being in the barn loft and peeing down on her younger brother, Bud, below her. I'm sure that was hilarious to her. We lived at Turkey Foot Lake, the largest of the Portage Lakes near Akron, Ohio. I swam before I could walk, and we ice skated in the winter with car tires on the banks blazing with small fires. We lived next door to a boat landing, Howie's, that had a restaurant. One winter evening, the 4 of us walked across our snowy front yard for a fish dinner. I fell down in the snow, and Mother said I had a funny look on my face. When she bent down to brush me off, she realized she had forgotten to put underpants on under my dress. Did she laugh as she ran all the way back to the house? I don't remember, but it was a story she loved to retell. Some nights I would crawl in bed with her. One night, I overestimated the width of the bed, and after crawling over her legs, I kept going and landed on the floor. I can see how the plunk of my body would have made her laugh. I laughed too, for a little bit. I fell asleep next to her, feeling her body moving like hiccups, trying to stop laughing. I sit with the prankster tonight as she's dying. She used to put little notes in my lunch bag most days. Often when I got home from school, she would have me sit cross-legged on her lap on the couch and tell her about my day. When my dad was away late at night, she'd make popcorn for us and would sit and watch TV. And then, so quickly, Mother is dead, but looking just like she has to me for so many long days I've been sitting with her. It was not scary at all, nor was her actual death. It was actually kind of efficient, a letting loose of the liquid built up in her lungs once, twice, a frown each time, the sound of her passing gas, all like a great exhaling. I was sitting on her bed with her and holding her hand, telling her, I love you, I love you, I love you. After I had packed up her belongings at the nursing care center, I sat with her one last time. I looked quietly and calmly at her face. It was all right, even though I had had to carry the burden of her dying all along, because she would never accept the reality of it. And then, all of a sudden, I realized she might sit straight up in bed, raise her hands with her fingers outstretched, and scream. I think at that late now, even 8 hours north and some 60 years later, you could still hear the notes of the uncontained, unapologetic, upended laughter, if you listen close enough. Thank you.
I'm Amanda Burns. Here's mine. My daughter is buried up on the mountain, our mountain, although I call it Claire's Mountain now. It's a mature, clean forest with poplar, mixed oaks, black gum, and some scraggly hemlocks. Truth be told, she's buried up there with our dogs. There's a split rail fence with a nature's gate between two trees, a space with no fence. Brian wanted to close it and have no openings to the outside world, but I figure I'll be buried up there too and might want to get out every once in a while. The dogs are on one side of the opening and Claire on the other, but they watch out for her. I know they do. I remember when we got her diagnosis, when we knew she was going to die, we knew we needed to bring her home. The doctor on duty didn't know squat about it. He was flustered we even asked. He needed to talk to everybody, lawyers, doctors, hospital admins. We could probably bring her home on Monday. She died on a Saturday. Brian had read the laws about home burial in North Carolina. He must have known this was coming before I did, before I could accept it. She could absolutely legally come home with us the moment she was pronounced dead. It took 8 hours once she was taken off her oxygen for her to take her final breath. And I guess that gave the doc time to verify the law. And so take her home we did. He told us to watch out for power and gas lines as if we were burying her in the back fucking yard of some suburban neighborhood. She came home in a stupid cardboard box with flowers embedded in it. It was a really expensive hospital box and bullshit anyway, because she'd be buried deep enough a flower could never germinate. It was late when we left the hospital, maybe around 11 at night. Brian drove her home in the front seat of his truck. The truck she was going to learn to drive in because it was big enough she'd never get hurt. I don't know how he managed the half-hour drive with our dead daughter in the seat next to him. I stopped and bought beer and cigarettes and smiled at the checkout guy like it was any other day, except I had an empty car seat in my car and Brian had a cardboard box in his truck. We put the stupid expensive box holding our sweet girl in the crib, went up to the shop and built her a simple pine casket. We brought her up and placed her in there with her nursing blankets and a super sharp pocket knife of Brian's. We didn't know where she was going, but we wanted her to be able to protect herself. Exhausted, we got good and drunk on cheap beer, all three of us on the shop floor before placing her back in the crib for the night. I never thought we'd have a kid. I had had 2 miscarriages and was 41 years old. I was okay with it, figured it wasn't in the cards, you know. I was gonna fill the house and yard with dogs instead. We adopted our 3rd big dog in August of 2019 and I missed my period in September. There were some bumps at first. Fear makes things bumpy, but I knew deep down this one felt different, and indeed it was. Because of my advanced age, I had the full panel of genetic testing done to check for birth defects, disorders, and the like. All came back clean, and around 12 weeks, I found out I was having a girl. I saw her tiny toes and very strong heartbeat on the first ultrasound. I was thrilled, excited, nervous. I started prenatal yoga right away. Brian and I were in the process of designing our new home that we were getting ready to build on our property. I think our builder was the 3rd person I told I was pregnant, hoping he'd bump us up on the list so the baby could come home to a sweet new house rather than a worn out shack been living in for the last 12 years. It didn't work, but that gave us time to switch the plans around, changing the small office into a second bedroom and making the downstairs entries larger to accommodate me carrying a car seat and grocery bags. We designed a huge island so there'd be room for us all to eat and her to do her homework. I remember measuring out Brian's wingspan, deciding Clara would be tall like him, and they both got 28 inches at the island and I got 22. I sort of hate that giant island now, a daily reminder that she's not with us, and I never ever use the downstairs entry, even if it's raining. I go around to the outside stairs and get all wet. I'm up here with her now, up on Claire's mountain. I'm trying to keep her in flowers, knowing the first frost is knocking at the door. I won't bring her store-bought flowers, only the ones I grow in my gardens. And leaves are starting to come down now, and I like her little grave kept clean. These are the only ways I can take care of her now, provide for her. She has a hand-carved headstone. It's just a rock, really. We saw it a lifetime ago on the side of the bank, like some discarded piece of trash the mountain cast off. We tried to get it so we could put it in a stone wall, but it was too heavy and we gave up. After she was in the ground and buried, Brian looked at me and said, "We got to get that rock." It had been years, but I knew exactly what rock he was talking about. We had a six-pack, a tractor, come along, hand truck, and ratchet straps. Crying, I asked him, "Is this what normal people do with grief?" It didn't matter. It's what we did. We got that damn rock in all its immensity and took it down to the shop, shaped it up nice, and hand chiseled Claire Jean Burns, 6/13/2020, heart 8/22/2020. We went through about 6 chisels, but it's here for eternity. It's getting covered with moss now, marking the passage of blasted time, but it's always here. She's always here, with us and with her dogs. Thanks.
It's such a privilege to read with this group of writers. As you can tell, it's wonderful. I'm Amy Jane Lynch, and I'm going to read this tonight for my sister Fran, who is online in Alaska, because she used to walk the barrels with me. Walking the barrel. Words entice, they tempt, like the metal barrels on the family farm, stored upright in the earth and gasoline smelling garage at the bottom of the gravel drive. Steel drums, tall as my 5th grade shoulder, heavy, 55 gallons big in bright circus colors, settled on their own flat ends. Each is unique, that goes without saying. So first I must choose the rusted red or the scratched yellow, which chipped and dented genre, which to tilt and twist from where it rests among its stolid fellows. It waited there for me all winter, through the cold days when I did not come to play. And for all that, it's harder to move now that I've come running on summer legs. So I tug and vex a barrel, inspiration or idea half formed. And it finally lets me heave it over. And it slams the concrete with a boom that suggests loneliness and echoes off the corrugated metal walls. Thrilling rumble and reverberation, the very thing I want from words. But this is only prelude, false starts and untoward syntax as I roll my barrel, scruffing as it goes across the oily floor, past seed bags, the wood stove, muddy tractors, and Papa's old beat up Ford Galaxy that he only drove on Sundays to church. I make a running start, but even then cannot roll the barrel in a single effort all the way to the top of the steep drive outside. not without help from my strongest cousins, the precocious ones, first to figure out where novels came from, the ones who left the farm the day they graduated high school and never came back to the valley, except for book signings and funerals. But that is in the future now. Now we're still just gangly kids in shorts and tees who won't get new shoes and haircuts until school starts in the fall. Kids who have no idea how the story ends. So I run it to barrel and startle it forward and roll it through the wide yawn of the garage's metal door and up the drive until the barrel bogs down, which it always does. And I have to brace against the grade in worn thin keds. And I have to pant and laugh and cry a little and then push again, labored step by step. Gravel nouns and summer dirt verbs. And if characters forget themselves or plots entangle, maybe an older cousin will critique things forward a paragraph or two. And quick as anything, the barrel will roll, 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 my hands up and over, into the shade of the old paper birch that has always stood at the top of the rutted drive. The barrel is mine now. No matter if it held poison or fertilizer last spring, material for world building either way. I straddle it, one tanned, skinned-kneed leg on either side, like riding a horse if a horse were a barrel. And I slip one wobbly foot under me, atop the curving drum, and then the other, and rise, knees trembling, and walk. Each chapter is fear-defying, for at any moment I might fall, art and act at end. Small steps, and all the while listening for the deep, hollow voice of the barrel and my own uncertain tones. Some days the barrel rolls itself across the long grass that stretches soft and lush all the way to the end of Mama's yard, where the hot creosote smelling highway threads through time. A dirt road when my mother was a girl, and before that a wagon path, a hunting trail, a buffalo trace. But all along, it was simply story, and will always be story.
Thank you all for coming here today and listening to these wonderful writings and readings. And I hope you'll come back in the fall when Writers at Home continues. Thank you.